Hi, my name is Chance Bonar. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Tufts University and a scholar of ancient Mediterranean religions. My goal here is to provide us with a brief introduction to the role of disability studies in the study of religion, medicine, magic, and health and antiquity. Disability studies is a huge and growing academic discipline that explores both the material, cognitive, and psychological realities of disability and the rhetoric and discourses around disability. Scholars in disability studies explore how disability is socially constructed to delineate whose bodies are considered normal or abnormal, as well as the effects of impairment upon people's lives. The field emerged primarily in the 1980s and has begun to play a more substantial role in the field of religious studies in the 21st century, although disability studies doesn't yet share kind of equal footing with topics like the study of race and ethnicity or of gendered sexuality in religious studies or late ancient studies. So for students interested in the intersection of religion and disability in antiquity, a common starting point are the narrations of Jesus's healing miracles in the New Testament Gospels. So take, for example, Jesus's healing of the blind man at Bethsaida in the Gospel of Mark. Read it out for us. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hand on his eyes again and looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then he sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." When reading through a critical disability studies lens, students often recognize the lack of agency attributed to the blind man in this story. He's brought to Jesus by some unnamed people who beg Jesus to touch and heal him, but the blind man's own desire to seek out Jesus or to be healed is not stated. Additionally, reading from a critical disability studies lens alerts readers to assumptions embedded in the Gospel of Mark's narrative about blindness being bad or abnormal and requiring some cure or fix. In this case, the man never asked to be cured, but has his community's and Jesus' expectations of normalcy imposed upon him. Others of Jesus' miracles open up discussion for readers about whether an impairment is a form of divine punishment or not, and raises questions about the relationship or lack thereof between disability and sin in ancient and late ancient thought. Narratives of miraculous healings are helpful when first exploring disability studies because they help us see what assumptions are at play in an ancient text about what bodies are considered normal, who has the authority to request healing, and how even acts of healing themselves make complex arguments for what types of people belong or not within a community. Additionally, scholars have taken interest in what ancient medicine and healthcare can teach us about the physical realities of impairment and the discourse of disability in antiquity. For example, Jane Dracott's work both in prostheses in antiquity and prosthetics and assistive technology in ancient Greece and Rome have helped us better understand the archaeological, literary, and documentary evidence for the use of artificial devices to replace missing body parts. For example, prostheses for limbs like walking sticks, crutches, footwear, replacements for missing eyes or teeth, wigs to cover lost hair. While not all of these phenomena may necessarily classify as a disability, disability studies has allowed scholars to explore how ancient medical professionals and paraprofessionals managed the spatial and aesthetic needs of the body within ancient Mediterranean society. So along with prosthetics are other actions or materials that aided individuals' healing processes. What is counted as medicine or magic in the study of ancient Mediterranean culture and religious practices has been heavily debated and has been equally as complex in disability studies. While some healers functioned within what might be called professional or official parameters, think, for example, of the famous physician Galen of Pergamon and physicians competing with him, giving speeches and public demonstrations of medical knowledge in 2nd century Rome. Others turn to religious freelance experts for healing for particular illnesses. We know from the enormous amount of votive carvings and offerings at various ancient Mediterranean temples and shrines that people sought healing for mobility or sensory impairments. whether eyes, ears, legs, feet. Scholars working on Coptic magical papyri preserved in late ancient Egypt, for example, have noted how the largest proportion of Coptic magical texts focus on the need for healing from a range of potentially debilitating concerns: scorpion stings, snake bites, fevers, abnormal menstrual bleeding, and longer-term conditions that impacted a person's physical or cognitive health. The topic of disability in antiquity intersects with the topic of enslavement and labor as well. Most notably, ancient enslavers made use of enslaved people as prosthetic body parts to compensate for limbs or reduce the use of their own body. For example, the writer Lucian, in the 2nd century, mentions a rich man who had 2 wooden feet that replaced his missing feet, but still required enslaved people to carry him around. Pliny the Younger recorded that his uncle, Pliny the Elder, similarly used enslaved labor to bathe and carry him around. An ancient historian, Jane Draycott, has demonstrated that animals could also be used to carry and lead around physically impaired people. Navigation of one's environment was sometimes done through assistive technologies that attached to the body, and at other times could exploit enslaved labor. So disability studies is interested not only in how disabilities are socially constructed or physically and cognitively experienced and managed, but also in the economic and communal effects of disability, in this case, how disability and ancient slave economies interacted. So within religious studies, the relationship between disability and religious rituals has been an important discussion. Scholars like Julia Watts-Belzer have explored how late ancient rabbinic, legal, and ritual literature perpetuated some assumptions about the relationship between disability and sin, but also gave room to interrogate whether and how important physicality in the body might be to ritual performance. In a similar vein, classicist Debbie Sneed's work on ancient Greek temples and healing shrines, like the sanctuary of Asclepius at Epidaurus, demonstrated that at some sites had ramps along with stairs in order to facilitate the movement of physically impaired people. She notes, Greek temples focused on healing built accessibly with their clientele in mind. So there are many different ways to begin to explore disability studies in the context of antiquity and late antiquity. One helpful starting point is an edited volume put together by Christian Leys called Disability in Antiquity. Published in 2017, this volume is multidisciplinary and brings together scholars working on a range of locations, time periods, and topics in one volume. So Greece, Rome, Mesopotamia, ancient Israel, Syriac Christians, Rabbinic Jews, early Islamic law, medieval North Africa, and more. While each of these chapters is focused on a specific topic, the various approaches offered here are helpful for seeing what type of work scholars are doing across pure modern studies to understand disability. Another helpful starting point is Jane Draycott's 2015 article, Reconstructing the Lived Experience of Disability in Antiquity, a case study from Roman Egypt. Here, Draycott focuses on the papyrological documentation of a single person named Gaius Gemellus Origenes from Coranus in the Fayum, and explores how this single in-depth example of how a physical impairment could or did affect the quality of life of an ancient individual. So she explores how Gaius navigated Roman Egypt as a blind person, and especially how he struggled to maintain inherited property and dealt with magical curses cast against him, dealt with with upholding his own status within his community. And along with Remedy itself as a professional organization and resource for further investigation, CRIP Antiquity is a wonderful online resource and space that promotes neurodiverse and disabled teachers and students of antiquity. The website has stories from community members, resources for more accessible and equitable teaching or conference practices, and a list of some scholars who are actively involved in ancient disability studies. Finally, this video is but one of many resources put together by members of Remedy, and there are more on this page that we are continually adding, so I hope that you will continue to explore other topics there. Thank you for your time.